Close your eyes for a moment and imagine standing in the dust of a battlefield somewhere in ancient Iraq. The sun is burning above you. The ground trembles under the weight of armored war elephants. In front of you stretches one of the most powerful armies on earth, tens of thousands of soldiers from an empire that has ruled the Middle East for 400 years. Their armor shines. Their banners cover the horizon. Their commanders have spent their entire lives fighting wars. And behind you? Only a few thousand desert warriors. Men who, only a few years earlier, were scattered tribes across the Arabian deserts. No grand empire. No massive cities. No war elephants. No legendary military tradition. Yet within a few days, something impossible will happen here. Something so shocking that historians still struggle to explain it. An empire that dominated the region for centuries will collapse, and a small army of roughly 20,000 Arabs will shatter the power of Persia forever. But the real story is even more surprising, because this battle was not just about numbers. It was not just about weapons. And it was not just about bravery. Hidden behind the clash of swords and the thunder of war elephants were deeper forces, political chaos, exhausted armies, broken leadership, and a moment in history where everything aligned perfectly for one side and disastrously for the other. By the end of this story, you will understand exactly how a mighty empire fell to a much smaller force, and why this single battle changed the future of the entire Middle East. But to understand what happened on that battlefield, we need to go back a few years. At the time, the Persian Empire was one of the great superpowers of the ancient world. Its rulers controlled vast lands stretching from modern Iraq and Iran deep into Central Asia. Their cities were rich. Their palaces were legendary. Their armies were feared across continents. For centuries, Persian armies had fought against the strongest powers of their age. They had battled Roman legions, crushed rebellions, and defended one of the most sophisticated civilizations on earth. To the Persians, the tribes of Arabia were not a serious threat. They were seen as scattered desert raiders, people who occasionally crossed the borders to raid villages and disappear back into the sands. No one in Persia could imagine that these tribes would soon become the force that ended their empire. But something extraordinary had happened in Arabia. For generations, the Arab tribes had been divided. They fought each other constantly. Alliances changed quickly. Unity was rare. But within a short period of time, those tribes became united under a new political and religious movement. And with that unity came something even more powerful: purpose. The new Arab armies were not massive, but they were highly motivated. Their warriors moved quickly across deserts that other armies struggled to cross. They were used to harsh conditions. They traveled light. They adapted quickly. Most importantly, they believed they were part of something historic. As these forces began expanding beyond Arabia, they started clashing with two of the greatest empires of the time, the Byzantine Empire in the west and the Persian Empire in the east. But Persia had a hidden weakness. For decades before the Arab armies arrived, Persia had been locked in a devastating series of wars against the Byzantines. These wars drained resources, destroyed cities, and exhausted soldiers on both sides. Even worse, Persia was suffering from internal chaos. After the death of one powerful ruler, the empire entered a period of political instability. Kings rose and fell rapidly. Assassinations became common. Noble families fought for power. The central government weakened. By the time a young ruler finally took the throne, the empire was already fragile. On paper, Persia still looked like a superpower. But beneath the surface, the foundations were cracking. And this is the moment when the Arab armies began pushing north. At first, the Persians were not overly worried. They had crushed enemies before. They had larger armies. They had elite heavy cavalry, warriors covered in armor from head to toe. They had massive war elephants capable of terrifying enemy horses. So when reports came that an Arab force was advancing toward Persian territory, the empire prepared a powerful army to stop them. The Persian commander assembled a force that likely numbered far more than the Arab army. Soldiers came from different regions of the empire. Heavy cavalry units were prepared. War elephants were brought to the battlefield. The goal was simple: crush the Arabs once and for all. Meanwhile, The Arab army moving toward Persia was much smaller, around 20,000 men. Compared to the Persian forces, it seemed almost insignificant. But the commanders of this army understood something important. They could not defeat Persia by fighting the same way Persia fought. Instead of relying on heavy armor and slow formations, the Arab forces relied on mobility. Their cavalry moved quickly across the battlefield. Their fighters adapted their tactics constantly. Eventually, the two armies met near a place that would become famous in history. The battlefield stretched across dusty plains near the Euphrates River. On one side stood the massive Persian army. On the other side, the smaller Arab force. When the battle began, the Persians immediately used their greatest advantage. War elephants. These enormous animals were terrifying weapons. Their size alone could break enemy formations. Horses often panicked at the sight and smell of them. Soldiers who had never seen elephants before could easily lose their nerve. When the elephants advanced, the Arab lines struggled. Horses became frightened. Some soldiers were pushed back. For a moment, it looked as if the Persians would crush the smaller army exactly as expected. But the battle did not end that day. It continued. Day after day, the two sides clashed. Waves of attacks, counterattacks, and brutal fighting stretched across the battlefield. At times the Persians seemed close to victory. Their heavy cavalry charged into enemy lines. Their elephants created chaos. But the Arab forces kept adapting. They studied the elephants. They realized that if the animals were injured or frightened, they could turn against their own side. So they began targeting the elephants directly. Archers aimed at the animals. Fighters moved closer to attack their legs and handlers. Slowly, the elephants became harder for the Persians to control. And then something unexpected happened. A massive dust storm swept across the battlefield. The wind threw sand and dust into the air, blinding soldiers and creating confusion. In the chaos, communication broke down. Units became separated. The battlefield turned into a storm of noise, shouting, and uncertainty. During this moment of confusion, the Persian command structure collapsed. Their general, the man responsible for leading the army, was killed during the chaos of battle. Once news of his death spread, panic began to ripple through the Persian forces. Armies in ancient battles depended heavily on leadership. When commanders died, coordination often collapsed. Soldiers began to retreat. Units lost direction. What started as confusion quickly became disaster. The Persian army began to break apart. Some soldiers fled the battlefield. Others tried to regroup but were overwhelmed by the advancing Arab forces. The carefully organized formations of the Persian military dissolved into scattered groups trying to escape. By the end of the battle, the result was shocking. The mighty Persian army had been defeated. But the consequences of this battle were even more dramatic than anyone expected. Because once the Persian defensive line collapsed, the road into the heart of the empire was suddenly open. Cities that had once seemed secure now faced advancing armies. Persian resistance weakened further as political instability continued to spread. The young Persian king fled east, attempting to regroup and rebuild resistance. But the empire was already unraveling. Within a relatively short period of time, the ancient Persian Empire, which had dominated the region for centuries, effectively disappeared. And this is why the story of this battle is so fascinating. It was not simply a case of a smaller army defeating a larger one. The fall of Persia was the result of many forces coming together at exactly the same time. Years of exhausting wars had weakened the empire. Political chaos had destroyed stable leadership. Economic strain had reduced the ability to maintain strong defenses. When the Arab armies arrived, Persia was already struggling to hold itself together. The battle was simply the moment when all those hidden weaknesses finally broke open. History often remembers the clash of armies, the heroic charges, and the dramatic moments on the battlefield. But the real reasons empires fall are usually deeper. Empires fall when their leadership weakens, when their people become divided, when years of conflict drain their strength. And sometimes, all it takes is one unexpected moment, one battle in the dust of a distant plain, to bring centuries of power crashing down. The warriors who fought on that battlefield may not have realized it at the time. But the world after that battle would never be the same. A new power had emerged in the region, and an empire that once seemed unstoppable had become history.